Trump thought he could divide and conquer North America, but his plan is spectacularly backfiring. While the world watches Trump's chaotic tariff war unfold, Prime Minister Mark Carney is in Mexico City this week, building the exact alliance Trump desperately wanted to prevent.
Thanks so much for joining us. U.S. President Donald Trump and his tariffs are likely to be a topic of conversation as Prime Minister Mark Carney meets with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico City. Carney departed Ottawa and arrived in Mexico early this afternoon. Sheinbaum has said the meetings with the Canadian Prime Minister are not meant to undermine their trade agreement with the U.S., known as CUSMA. Carney and Sheinbaum are expected to sign a strategic partnership agreement that will cover infrastructure, trade, security, and more. He'll also join discussions on how Canada and Mexico can work together to combat drug and firearm trafficking and other activities linked to organized crime. The trip comes as Ottawa looks for more trade with Mexico in response to the U.S. trade war. Both countries are also bracing for the renegotiation of the continental trade deal linking all three economies.
This isn't just diplomatic fence mending, it's a strategic masterstroke that exposes the fundamental weakness in Trump's entire North American strategy. We're witnessing the formation of a comprehensive Canada-Mexico partnership that could reshape trade relations for decades, all while Trump's own policies push his neighbors closer together. So what exactly is happening in Mexico City? And why is Trump's divide and conquer strategy crumbling before our eyes? To understand this diplomatic chess game, we need to rewind to last fall, when Trump's tariff threats first started fracturing the North American alliance. Canada's relationship with Mexico took a serious hit when some Canadian politicians responded to Trump's tariff talk by suggesting Mexico should be thrown out of the North American free trade deal entirely. Ontario Premier Doug Ford and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith both floated the idea of a bilateral Canada-US deal that would leave Mexico out in the cold. It was exactly what Trump wanted, his two neighbors turning on each other instead of uniting against his protectionist agenda. But Trump's strategy contained a fatal flaw that's now becoming painfully obvious. The more unpredictable and aggressive Trump becomes with tariffs, the more Canada and Mexico realize they need each other to survive his economic warfare.
We are both undertaking massive transformations of our economy. Plan Mexico, Canada strong. Our efforts will be strengthened by working together.
Mexico and Canada want to do more on two fronts. First, work together to save North America-wide free trade by coordinating strategies for next year's review of CUSMA, the trade deal that replaced the original NAFTA 5 years ago.
How do we eliminate these tariffs that we both face prior to the end of the year so that we can have a fruitful discussion on the USMCA future beginning in 2026?
As Laura McDonald from Carleton University puts it, after 8 months of Trump's chaotic presidency, it's become crystal clear that Canada is not better off without Mexico. The numbers tell the story of just how intertwined North American trade really is. Mexico is Canada's third biggest trading partner with $56 billion in bilateral trade last year alone. But it's not just about the money, it's about the integrated supply chains that Trump's own policies are threatening to destroy. The Canada-US-Mexico agreement creates what economists call Factory North America, where production is so deeply integrated across all three countries that American factories literally cannot function without parts and components from both Canada and Mexico. Trump's tariff threats aren't just hurting his neighbors, they're sabotaging American manufacturing. This is where Trump's economic illiteracy becomes dangerous. He genuinely believes tariffs are some kind of superpower that can magically bring manufacturing back to America. But reality keeps trumping his populist fantasies. When he imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian goods back in February, he had to carve out exemptions for goods that comply with CUSMA because American businesses were screaming about the damage to their supply chains. Even his own 35% tariff escalation in August came with the same CUSMA exemption, proving that Trump knows his tariff war would cripple American industry if he actually followed through. But here's where it gets really interesting. Trump's treatment of Canada and Mexico reveals the contradictions at the heart of his strategy. While he hit Canada with escalating tariffs, he gave Mexico a 90-day extension back in July, despite having previously threatened to raise rates on both countries simultaneously. This inconsistent approach isn't strength, it's weakness. It shows Trump is making it up as he goes along, with no coherent strategy beyond trying to look tough for his base. The differential treatment backfired spectacularly because it reminded both countries that they can't trust Trump to honor any agreements or maintain consistent policies.
USMCA, is strength together. It's strength of the three countries together. That's what makes North America that contributes to North America be the economic envy of the world. And Canada is absolutely committed to work with both our partners. If there's opportunities to improve the agreement, we will pursue those. We can think of some. Our Mexican colleagues can. I'm sure the Americans will as well. That'll be informed by our review process. But we'll move forward together, without question. Is that unequivocal enough for you? Because if you want it to be unequivocal, just write down unequivocal.
When your negotiating partner is completely unpredictable, your only rational response is to build alternative relationships that don't depend on his whims. That's exactly what Carney is doing in Mexico City this week. The timing of this Mexico trip is absolutely brilliant. Carney is meeting with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum just as the United States officially launches its review of the North American trade agreement. Instead of waiting to see what Trump might demand in those negotiations, Canada and Mexico are proactively building a bilateral relationship that can survive whatever chaos Trump unleashes next. The trip is expected to produce a comprehensive Canada-Mexico partnership agreement and a new security dialogue focused on transnational crime and drug smuggling, exactly the kind of cooperation that makes both countries less dependent on American leadership.
From reporters after meeting with top officials there to get a vital trade relationship back on track. Evan Dyer has been watching it all. So, Evan, can you bring us up to speed?
Adrian, the Canadian and Mexican leaders appear to have smoothed over the tensions that emerged following the election of Donald Trump when he succeeded in driving a wedge between the two countries with his tariff plans, causing some Canadian politicians to suggest that Mexico should be cut out of the CUSMA trade deal. These are two countries that face a common threat, and they seem to have decided they're stronger facing it together.
We are both undertaking massive transformations of our economy. Plan Mexico, Canada strong. Our efforts will be strengthened by working together.
Mexico and Canada want to do more on two fronts. First, work together to save North America-wide free trade by coordinating strategies for next year's review of CUSMA, the trade deal that replaced the original NAFTA 5 years ago.
How do we eliminate these tariffs that we both face prior to the end of the year so that we can have a fruitful discussion on the USMCA future beginning in 2026?
The two countries also have to cooperate without provoking the Trump administration.
So we're going to be very careful to make sure that the visit is not portrayed as some kind of strategic meeting or ganging up in some way with the White House.
But both countries know they can't count on restoring normal trade with the U.S., and both are looking for new partners.
It's a chance for us to talk not just about the tariff dispute that's underway, but also what are we going to be able to do to deepen our bilateral relationships with each other. We've spent way too much time ignoring each other. Now it's time to do more.
President Sheinbaum said she wanted to strengthen maritime trade with Canada. Mexico is in the middle of a huge renewal of its infrastructure, including airports, seaports, and rail. But the Mexicans are concerned that Canada's...
But this isn't just about trade, it's about exposing Trump's strategic incompetence. Trump claims he's finally standing up for Middle America by punishing foreigners who have supposedly looted and pillaged the United States. But his own policies are pushing America's closest neighbors into each other's arms while making American goods more expensive for his own supporters. The man who wrote The Art of the Deal is getting outmaneuvered by countries with a fraction of America's economic power. Carney's approach reveals just how much Trump has weakened America's position. Instead of begging Trump for favorable treatment, Canada is diversifying its relationships and building leverage for future negotiations. When Trump inevitably comes back to the table demanding concessions, he'll find that Canada and Mexico have strengthened their position by working together instead of competing for his favor. The economic reality is devastating for Trump's narrative. Canada's GDP shrank by 1.6% in the second quarter of 2025, squeezed by Trump's sectoral tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos. But instead of capitulating, Canada is using this pressure as motivation to build alternatives to American trade dependence. Mexico, meanwhile, has positioned itself as the more reliable partner by not retaliating against Trump's tariffs, creating a stark contrast with Canada's more confrontational approach. This difference in tactics actually strengthens both countries because it shows they can pursue different strategies while maintaining their underlying alliance. Trump's fundamental misunderstanding of North American economics is becoming impossible to hide. He genuinely believes that trade is a zero-sum game where America's neighbors are somehow stealing from American workers. But the integrated nature of North American manufacturing means that when Trump hurts Canada and Mexico, he's actually hurting American businesses that depend on cross-border supply chains. The Canada-US-Mexico agreement was supposed to formalize this integration, but Trump's tariff war is undermining the very system he helped create during his first term. The contradiction is so obvious that even Trump's own officials have to acknowledge it. When he imposed his initial 25% tariffs, he immediately had to exempt CUSMA-compliant goods because American importers were facing catastrophic cost increases. When he escalated to 35% in August, he kept the same exemption. Every time Trump tries to get tough on trade, economic reality forces him to back down. Carney's Mexico strategy is designed to exploit these contradictions. By building a stronger bilateral relationship with Mexico, Canada is creating alternatives that reduce dependence on Trump's unpredictable decision-making. The comprehensive partnership agreement they're negotiating will include trade, security, and energy cooperation, all areas where Trump's America First policies have created gaps that need filling. The security dialogue is particularly significant because it addresses one of Trump's main justifications for tariffs. Trump claims he's punishing Canada and Mexico for allowing drugs and migrants to cross into the United States. But his tariff war actually undermines the cooperation needed to address these problems. When Canada and Mexico work together on security issues, they can present a unified front that's harder for Trump to dismiss or divide. The energy component of the partnership is equally strategic. Canada is a major energy exporter, while Mexico has significant energy needs and growing renewable energy ambitions that could reshape the continent's economic future.
Said she wanted to strengthen maritime trade with Canada. Mexico is in the middle of a huge renewal of its infrastructure, including airports, seaports, and rail. But the Mexicans are concerned that Canada's ports aren't big enough to handle the volume of trade they'd like to see. Adrian, Mexican officials are even talking about becoming directly involved in the expansion of Canadian ports, perhaps even helping to build terminals dedicated to Canada-Mexico trade. Mexico is becoming a wealthier country. It's now the world's 12th biggest economy, and the government here wants to raise the standard of living. President Sheinbaum said this morning she wants to question Carney about Canada's healthcare system with a view to possibly reproducing it here. Adrian.
By strengthening energy ties, both countries reduce their vulnerability to Trump's threats while building the infrastructure for a more sustainable economic relationship. This kind of long-term thinking is exactly what Trump's chaotic approach lacks. Trump's reaction to Carney's Mexico trip reveals his growing desperation. He's been trying to play Canada and Mexico against each other since taking office, but his own policies keep pushing them together. The more unpredictable Trump becomes, the more his neighbors realize they need each other to manage the relationship with their increasingly unreliable giant neighbor. The broader implications go far beyond North America. Trump's failure to maintain American leadership in his own backyard sends a signal to allies around the world that they can't count on American consistency. When your closest neighbors start building alternatives to American-led institutions, it suggests that American hegemony is weaker than it appears. China and other competitors are undoubtedly taking notes about America's declining ability to manage its own neighborhood. The timing couldn't be worse for Trump because the CUSMA review is rapidly approaching. The trade deal includes a mandatory review on July 1st, 2026, but Mexican officials expect negotiations to start much earlier, potentially this fall. Instead of entering those talks from a position of strength, Trump will face a Canada-Mexico axis that's been strengthened by his own divisive tactics. The economic data supports this strategic shift. While trade accounts for 67% of Canada's GDP and 73% of Mexico's GDP, it represents only 24% of American GDP. This means Canada and Mexico have much more to lose from trade disruptions, but it also means they have stronger incentives to work together to maintain trade relationships that don't depend entirely on American cooperation. Trump's tariff war has already demonstrated the limits of American leverage. Despite imposing increasingly severe tariffs, he hasn't achieved any of his stated objectives. Fentanyl continues to cross American borders, migration patterns haven't changed significantly, and American consumers are paying higher prices for imported goods. The only clear result has been to push Canada and Mexico closer together, while weakening America's position as the dominant North American power. Carney's diplomatic success in Mexico exposes the fundamental contradiction in Trump's approach. Trump wants to be seen as a strong leader who puts America first, but his actual policies weaken American influence while strengthening the positions of countries he claims to be punishing. By building alternatives to American-dominated institutions, Canada and Mexico are reducing Trump's leverage in future negotiations. The comprehensive partnership agreement being negotiated in Mexico City represents everything Trump fears most: his neighbors working together to reduce their dependence on American leadership. Instead of competing for Trump's favor, Canada and Mexico are building a relationship that can survive whatever chaos Trump unleashes next. This strategic patience is exactly what Trump's impulsive decision-making cannot counter. The security implications are equally significant. By cooperating on issues like transnational crime and drug trafficking, Canada and Mexico can address Trump's stated concerns while reducing their vulnerability to his threats. This kind of proactive cooperation makes it harder for Trump to justify his tariff war as necessary for American security. When your neighbors are working together to solve the problems you claim to be worried about, your justification for economic warfare starts to look pretty thin. Trump's divide and conquer strategy is failing because it was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of North American economics and politics. He assumed that Canada and Mexico would compete for American favor rather than working together to manage American pressure. But his own unpredictability has made cooperation the only rational response. When you can't trust your dominant neighbor to honor agreements or maintain consistent policies, your only choice is to build alternatives that don't depend on their reliability. The Mexico trip represents a new phase in Canada's relationship with the Trump administration. Instead of reacting to Trump's latest threats, Carney is proactively building the relationships and institutions needed to manage American pressure over the long term. This strategic approach puts Canada in a much stronger position for whatever comes next, whether it's CUSMA renegotiation, continued tariff wars, or a future American administration that wants to repair the damage Trump has done to North American cooperation. Trump's weakness is becoming impossible to hide. The man who promised to make America great again is watching his closest neighbors build alternatives to American leadership. His tariff war has failed to achieve any of its objectives while strengthening the very partnerships he wanted to prevent. Carney's success in Mexico City isn't just diplomatic fence-mending, and it's a demonstration that Trump's America First policies are actually making America less influential in its own neighborhood. The final irony is that Trump's trade war is creating exactly the kind of economic nationalism he claims to oppose. By threatening the integrated North American economy with unpredictable tariffs, Trump is forcing Canada and Mexico to become more economically independent from the United States. His policies are accelerating the very deglobalization he says he wants, but in ways that weaken rather than strengthen American influence. As Carney returns from Mexico with a strengthened partnership agreement, Trump faces the consequences of his own strategic failures. His neighbors are no longer waiting for American leadership. They're building alternatives that can function regardless of what happens in Washington. That's not the art of the deal. It's the art of getting outmaneuvered by countries that understand long-term strategy better than the self-proclaimed master negotiator who keeps shooting himself in the foot.